We're going to be checking out of Park MGM. It's been a great stay here, and you will see me right here for the intro of the next vlog. So I'm going to end the vlog here. Hope you guys enjoyed the hands, and I will see you in the next vlog. Peace. Welcome back to another episode of Douchebag Poker Vlogs. As you probably just heard 5 seconds ago, we're going to be checking out a Park MGM. I'm going to be checking into a new hotel today, but since it's still the morning, oh, I forgot to turn off the fan. Okay, as I was saying, it's still the morning and I can't check in just yet, so I'm gonna get some food real quick and then I'm gonna do something that I now want to do every time I go to a new place or city or whatever, which is go to a local climbing gym, and we're gonna pass the time that way, and then afterwards we're gonna play some poker. So I will try to play more solid for the rest of the trip. Yesterday and the day before weren't the best sessions and weren't the best play of my life, but we're gonna try to change that, and yeah, wish me luck. Alright guys, we have checked into Excalibur. Here's the beautiful view from the first floor. Fun fact, my most viewed video on the channel is of a session I played here at Excalibur. The poker room unfortunately closed down several years ago, so I'm gonna have to go somewhere else to play. But I just finished climbing and I'm going to shower real quick and then we'll get into the poker. Alright, I think you guys know the drill by now. We're playing the 2-5 at Aria, and we buy in for the max, which is 1500. Hopefully we have a good session. We're currently 1-1 in sessions during the trip. In this first hand, I've got Queen Jack suited in the low jack. I raise it up to 20 and get called by the hijack. We're going to a flop heads up, which comes down 7-7-5 with 2 clubs. We've got 2 overs and a club draw. I c-bet 20, and my opponent pretty quickly raises to 60. I decide to make the call here. The turn brings the ace of spades, which doesn't improve us, but I guess should be good for our range, although he is kind of repping better than a pair here. I check it over to him, and he decides to check back. The river comes the 8 of hearts. We've officially got queen high for the rest of the hand, and given that my opponent checked on the turn, I don't imagine he should have much. I feel like if he had a value hand on the flop, he would have c-bet it on the turn and shouldn't really be scared of the ace. Even if he did have something like a straight draw, he would have to have like 6-4 for the 8 to improve him. I think it's more likely he has something maybe like 8-6, and I think I can get him off his hand by betting here. He could very likely have a club draw like I do. So I decide to just bet 75 here. I don't think I need to make it too big given my read, and he does end up folding. So I think my read was right, and maybe he was just trying to steal it with air. Either way, we take down a small pot with a bluff to start off the session. I've got ace-jack of diamonds for the next one. We're in early position and I open it up to $25. The player in the low jack instantly 3-bets me to $100, and so far he's been a pretty competent player, so not really sure what this is kind of representing, but I decide to flat here with my ace-jack. The flop comes down, king for queen rainbow. We've got not much else besides a gutter here and an overcard. I check it over to my opponent and he checks back. The turn is the jack of hearts. We've now got a middling pair, but this isn't really much besides just some showdown value, and it is still going to be kind of hard to play against any aggression. I check it over to my opponent once again, and once again he checks back, so this is looking like a little bit more of a promising hand. The river comes the 4 of hearts, which shouldn't have really changed anything, And I decide I'm just going to try to take it to showdown here. I decide to check it over to him, not going to get out of line here. And he tosses out $100 pretty casually. And now I'm kind of in a tough spot because I just don't feel like he's going to be playing any really strong hands this way, or even like a weak king this way. It just feels like a bluff, but at the same time, do I want to call here with ace jack? If he had like queen x or something, I don't imagine he's going to be value betting those. I feel like he'd just want to take showdown value as well. Kind of an annoying spot. I'm not really sure. Also, I'm trying to think of better hands I could be calling with here. I guess I could have ace queen sometimes, so that would be a good hand to call with. Not 100% sure where ace jack falls in my range here, so annoying spot. I eventually figured that my opponent could have something like ace 5 suited that he's trying to steal this pot with. He could also have ace jack that he's turning to a bluff, in which case we would be chopping. And finally, I figured he could have maybe like 10s or 9s, although I personally wouldn't 3-bet those against an early position open. He could have very well have done that. So I eventually toss in the call with my pair of jacks, and my opponent flips over queen 8 of diamonds. He's going to win this hand with middle pair. He got super thin value from us, unfortunately, and yeah, the instant 3-bet to 100 pre-flop with queen 8, and then the value bet on the river. This guy is on another level. I can't hope to ever be as good as this guy. We got outplayed. Hopefully we can do better in the next hand. In this next hand, I've got ace-king offsuit in the hijack, and I open it to 20. The player in the cutoff calls, and he's the same guy from the last hand. The flop comes down 9 ace-jack rainbow. We've got top pair, top kicker here. I bet $30, made it pretty big this time, and my opponent makes the call. The turn brings the 10 of diamonds. Definitely not a great card. It puts 3 to a straight out there. Jack 10 now has 2 pair. It just makes the board a lot more scary, and yeah, I still feel kind of comfortable with ace-king here, but not thrilled. I decide to check here just to see what my opponent does. I wouldn't really want to get raised here, and yeah, I feel like my hand is a lot less strong at this point. So I check to my opponent. He decides to bet here, unfortunately. He makes it 75, and I do feel like it's a little bit weak to fold here, but I'm not super thrilled, like I said. I ultimately decide on making the call. The river is the 7 of diamonds, completing the backdoor flush draw, and it also puts 4 to a straight out there. So, yeah, not a great card, and I decide to check to my opponent again. He decides to bet 175 here, and this really sucks. In hindsight, I think a fold is probably the best option here. Yeah, it's just a super scary board, and I think I could just look for a better spot in this case. I could definitely have some better hands, like 2 pair or something like that. Not sure. This is probably the hand I'm most curious about your guys' opinion on, so please let me know what you guys think in the comments. But ultimately, I do decide to call, and my opponent turns over pocket 9s for a flop set. So pretty unfortunate hand. We just can't seem to beat this opponent. And yeah, we are going to lose another pretty big pot against this guy. I've got 10-9 offsuit in the big blind for this hand. There's no small blind for this hand, and action folds all the way to the button. He's a pretty loose aggressive player, and he opens to 15. I decide to defend, so we're going heads up to a flop, and it comes down queen 3 jack rainbow. We've got an open-ended straight draw here. I check to my opponent, and expecting him to bet, I am pretty much planning on a check raise here with my hand. We've got very little showdown value, and we're going to try to steal the pot. So once he bets 25, I decide to make it 80, and my opponent calls. The turn comes the king of hearts, guys. So we bink the straight. Really good turn card for us, and I'm going to continue with the aggression here like I would if I didn't hit. I bet 135 this time. We're not playing that much more effective, so I'm setting up for a pot-sized shove on the river, and luckily my opponent calls. The river is a pretty irrelevant 6 of hearts. It does complete the backdoor flush, but I actually did not know that at the time. But that's not something I would be scared of. I'm going to go for value here, and I put my opponent all in for just about 325. Luckily, he doesn't call right away, so we know we're ahead. And he actually tanks for a while and then says to the dealer, why do you have to put out a cooler? He either has a set of 3s or a flush. And at that point, I did notice that there was a flush on the board. But, of course, it doesn't matter. After a while, he eventually calls. And then once I show my hand, he shows us king, queen of clubs after getting a little bit angry. So we win a pretty nice one after those last 2 hands. I've got king, queen offsuit in the small blind for this next one. The player on the button had just sat down, So he was a pretty new player, but he seemed pretty comfortable. When he opens to 15, I assume his range could be pretty much anything that he thinks he could steal the blinds with. So I decided to make the call here. Maybe you could 3-bet sometimes, but I just called. The flop comes down 5-7-3 with 2 clubs. I check, my opponent bets 15, and for this price, I decide to just float here, but I don't know, probably debatable. Maybe I can call with some ace highs, but I don't know, maybe king queen's not good enough. Anyways, doesn't really matter. The turn card comes, the queen of spades. We've got top pair now and a good kicker. I check it to my opponent once again. This should be good for his range, so I think sometimes he's going to be barreling here. He decides to check though, unfortunately. The river comes down. The queen of hearts. So we now got trips, and I'm not going to check it to him. I'm going to try to get some value here. And guys, this is once again one of those situations where I don't exactly know what I was thinking at the time, but I'm pretty sure I just wanted to get as much value as I could since none of the money got in on the turn. So I decided to bet 75 here, a small overbet, and my opponent doesn't fold right away and doesn't call right away. So we're pretty sure we're ahead, and hopefully we can get some value. He tanks for a little bit and then eventually decides on a call. So once I show my hand, we're obviously good. He says that my king wasn't live after he mucks his hand, and he says that he had king 7. So definitely don't blame the guy for calling. I could definitely be doing that like with some random hands given the way I play. I honestly don't even fully know my range in a lot of these random spots, so neither should anyone else. You guys might be wondering why I have 8-6 offsuit in the graphics for this next hand, and that's because the player in the hijack limps, the small blind completes, and I'm in the big blind, so I just check my option, and we're going to a flop with 8-6. It comes down queen high, everyone checks, the turn brings an 8, small blind checks again, I decide to check as well, so does the hijack, and then the river comes down a 7, so we've got a pair of 8s here. The small blind now decides to bet $5, and although normally I could just call here and take showdown, I decided to be a little bit creative, I guess is an interesting word to use, and I just raised to 20, and you guys will see why in a bit. But the hijack folds, and then the small blind shows a 7, asks me to show the bluff, and then I do show the showdown value bluff, whatever.
Obviously a 7. Obviously a 7. Show me the bluff.
No, I had it. Anyways, you guys might be wondering why I'm showing you guys such an uneventful hand, and that's because the player in the small blind was the same player from the last hand, and he was a guy named George from England who was visiting Vegas. He was only 21 or 22, sorry George, I forgot. But as soon as he sat down at the table, we started just talking about poker, and specifically the poker game at Aria, and I started telling him about some stories from the last session that I didn't mention in the previous vlog. One, another poker vlogger who you should all know, Mariano, was playing against someone heads up at a different table, and then at the VIP table, Dan Bilzerian was playing, and as every real poker player knows, Dan Bilzerian is one of the most talented poker players in the world by pure raw skill. And then finally, one of the dealers during that session I played told us a story about how some kid had come in the day before, started playing at the lowest stakes, and then ran up a huge stack, moved up to 2-5, and then somehow ended up in the VIP game and ended the night with 14.5k. Yeah, pretty crazy night for starting at 1-3. And as I finished telling George about this kid, he looks at me and he goes, "Hello." And it turns out George actually was that kid who ran up a huge stack and had that insane session. And the person playing heads up against Mariano was actually George's friend who had taken him to Vegas. And it turned out to be true because some of the staff members at Aria in our future sessions were asking him questions about that night. So pretty crazy. The player who sat right next to me was the person I heard about the night before. And anyways, we just started talking and sharing poker stories and knowledge and whatever. And we both agreed that we'd try to make some plays at each other during the night, especially if it was blind versus blind. So now you know I'm showing you the 8-6 hand. Although it wasn't super eventful, it does foreshadow some things to come. In this next one, I've got ace-jack offsuit in early position. I decide to make it 25. George is in the big blind. He's the only one who calls, so we're going heads up to a flop of jack, deuce, queen. We've got middle pair here. George checks to me, and I decide I'm just going to check it back here. Don't really want to bet off any worse hands, and I'm not really getting anything better to fold. So the turn comes the 9 of diamonds. George decides to bet 45 here, and honestly, don't really know what I should be doing here. He's basically saying with this sizing that he has at least a queen, And yeah, we both also agreed to make plays at each other, and I'm sure he's capable. So didn't really know what to do and didn't know my plan for the river, which I definitely should be thinking about. But at the time, I decided I'm not going to fold to him just yet, so I decided to make the call. The river is an irrelevant deuce of diamonds, so we've got jacks and deuces. George decides to put out a bet of $90 here, and I just thought it looks like a value bet here. I think I was also thinking about the fact that he's probably going to show me regardless. I'm just going to let go of my middle pair and live to see another day. And he does in fact show us his hand. I believe you. I believe you. You got it, man. You got it.
You bored?
Nice hand, bro. But he had 7-6 of clubs. So we get bluffed in this one. I have to call just for the content. Why am I folding? What am I doing? I'm trolling.
Not showed you.
It's time to get revenge. I've got Jack 10 offsuit in the big blind. George is in the small blind, and once action folds to him, he raises to 15. I'm definitely not going anywhere, so I decide to flat here. The flop comes down Queen 8-5 with 2 clubs, so we've got a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. George checks it over to me. I'd expect him to c-bet most of the time, so I feel like he's got to be pretty weak. I decide to bet 30 here as a semi-bluff. He decides to call though, unfortunately.
Okay. Only a little something.
The turn brings an 8, which does not help us. George checks once again, and like I said, guys, we're going to degen here. No rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. I'm just trying to make a play at George and show that I can bluff him. So I bet 75 here. He calls once again. The river comes down the king of spades, and like I said, guys, there's no rhyme or reason. He checks to me. I'm going to put pressure. I bet 175. We're going to try to win this hand by any means possible and try to open up the game a bit.
You're trying to bluff me off the queen now? I still think it's the bluff.
Of course you do.
Oh, but I could lose the bluff. Not that one.
So, as you guys saw, George folds. I gotta show the bluff here and, you know, make the game a little more interesting and also get my revenge.
I did not flush draw.
Oh, yeah? Alright, guys, and with that, the session is coming to a pretty quick stop because we have just one more hand left. I've got King-Jack offsuit in the hijack, or as I like to call it, Jack-King off, my favorite hand of all time. George opens it to 15 in the low jack. I'm next to act, and I make the call. The big blind calls as well, so we are going 3 ways to a flop. It comes down 10-6 jack, rainbow. We've got top pair, good kicker here. George continues with a really small bet of $15 here, and even though I would have liked to get a little more money in the pot, raising feels kind of weird, so I'm not going to do that. I just flat call. The big blind gets out of the way. Turn brings the king of clubs, guys. Makes the board a little bit more coordinated, but I'm not scared here. We've got top two. I'm going to leave that in because that's funny. We've got top 2. I'm not going to be a nit and look for monsters under the bed thinking he has a straight and stuff. So he checks to me. Now we're very confident that we've got the best hand. Under normal circumstances, I don't really ever go for speech play or anything. I don't really do that stuff. I just try to play my game. But we're having fun at the table. Everyone's very chill. And of course, it's a heads-up hand between me and George. We're currently 1-1. I've got to beat him for this last hand. So I decide to ask him what I bet on the turn in the hand where I bluffed him. And I'll just let you guys hear the rest of the audio. Well, in that hand that I bluffed you, what did I bet on the turn? I bet pot again, right? Something like that.
75.
Yeah. Okay, 75.
I knew what I was doing. I knew literally that was exactly what you were going to do after I did something like that's more than pot. Not enough to get me off the hand.
George ends up calling and checking in the dark. The river brings the 4 of hearts. Alright. 100. It'd be sick if you raised.
No, I'm not strong enough to raise. I absolutely cannot fold this. Oh my god. What do you mean?
yeah, so we play some mind games. It ends up working out for us, and this time we get value, and we are officially 2-1 against George for the day. USA 1, England 0. Let's go. But in all seriousness, it was a really fun session. George is a super cool dude and a very good player, and he hadn't been to the Win yet, which is my favorite poker room, so we actually agreed that we'd go the next day and play a session there. And after all was said and done, we ended up booking a win for this session of $450. So very good session. We are up a good amount on the trip, and we had a lot of fun as well. Normally, I try not to really get out of line. I just try to play a solid game as much as I can, but it's fun to mess around every now and then and just enjoy poker as just a fun game, which is how most of us started poker, as opposed to just being a robot and trying to play as perfectly as possible. All right. You probably already heard in my voiceover you know, what happened with George a couple days ago, but yeah, he had an insane run, and I just happened to meet him at this table, and we're going to be playing tomorrow at the Win, which is my favorite poker room, and wish us luck. Last time I was at Excalibur, I remember the Baja Fresh being open 24/7. I was hoping that I could go there as kind of like a last resort dinner option because I was going to go to Nacho Daddy, but we're going to have to settle for chips and guac. Dinner of champions, I know, guys. Anyways, that's it for this vlog. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to get this out before the new year, but Happy New Year, guys. Sorry about that. And I'll see you in the next vlog where we will be playing at the Win. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you soon. Peace.